One pack, green, over. 5716, roger, over.
16, light 2, 1 Victor, 2 packs, Recon 1, over.
Welcome to Pick 1, a mental exercise brought to you by 9-Hole Reviews. In each Pick 1 episode, we deliberately ask you to choose between two options with opposing weapon systems and give you a scenario to mentally put yourself into. We publish this scenario and options on all of our social media pages about a week before our live discussion segment for members and audience to comment and, most importantly, to vote on the poll. During our live Pick 1 segment, we will discuss the scenario in our 4-part live discussion. Part 1, a review of the scenario and options. Part 2, we discuss our choices and why. Part 3, we discuss comments that stood out to us. And finally, Part 4, we open the forum to any viewer that's present to join us in the live chat. Now, to start this week's Pick 1 exercise, this is a recap from our previously published scenario brief. Welcome to Pick 1, a mental exercise brought to you by 9-Hole Reviews. In each Pick 1 episode, we deliberately ask you to choose between two options with opposing weapon systems and give you a scenario to mentally put yourself into the Gaza Strip. Now, to start this week's Pick 1 exercise, this is a recap from our previously published scenario brief. Welcome back to Pick 1. This week we journey over to the Middle East, Israel and Palestine to be exact, for the scenarios taking place on the 21st of October 2023. Now for you, after you've left your SOCOM outfit and unit and spent multiple deployments in the Middle East, you've now found post-military employment as a chief of security and primarily operate an executive protection contract for a prominent tech giant's family. Now, 2 weeks ago, Hamas infiltrated Israel and inflicted one of the worst attacks to Israel since its existence. On the fateful day of the October 7th attack, your CEO's 19-year-old daughter, Sarah, was attending a music festival in Re'em, Israel. Hamas fighters flooded the music festival during the early morning hours and massacred up to 270 civilians and took a number of civilian hostages to the Gaza Strip. Initial proof of life emerged that Sarah is being held in an unknown location in Gaza during the first days of the abduction, and you have temporarily relocated to a safe house south of Tel Aviv to start to work with local assets to locate Sarah. However, you don't have any IDF authorization to operate in an armed security operation, so you have been limited to intelligence gathering and preparing for negotiations. Israeli Air Force bombings and power outages have made it extremely difficult to keep in touch with your freelancers and undercover security contractors on ground as well. However, you've just received 2 credible proofs of life, a very probable indication that Sarah is being held in an underground location in the northern part of the Gaza Strip. She is suspected to be held in a partial tunnel network under an abandoned school. Now, intelligence suggests that the Palestinian insurgents have been busy moving casualties, ammunition, and weapons to an alternate location, since the network that Sarah is being held in has been partially damaged by IDF JDAMs. Your security element in Gaza agrees that you currently have a rough 48-hour window, as the insurgent strength in Sarah's location has decreased about 70% in order to move supplies and set up their alternate location. Now, your primary mission here is to extract Sarah from her current location, as insurgent security is lowered. Now, your secondary mission is to exfiltrate your undercover contractors from the budding war zone. Your 3 security contractors in Gaza will rendezvous with you for a hasty extraction of Sarah as a part of their exfiltration as well. This plan calls for a covert infiltration into Gaza. Remember, you don't have the authorization from the IDF for an armed extraction, so you must travel undercover to an olive grove near Erez to meet a ranking IDF officer who will ferry you through checkpoint Erez as an NGO representative. Now, once you cross into Gaza, you're going to meet your on-ground team at Isbat Beit Hanun to penetrate through 250 meters worth of security tunnel networks to Sarah's location and breach to extract her. Upon extraction, you will meet a smuggler on the shore side to penetrate the IDF's sea blockade for safe transport to Cyprus and safe passage home through the local US embassy. Now, this, needless to say, is an extremely high-risk security operation. That said, your employer has prepared $7.4 million worth of a payout for you and your team to distribute upon mission success. And since you are relying on bribes and covert action in this mission, any weapons you select must be concealable. And so, as you prepare to leave your safe house, you grab a civilian bag and start packing your weapon. Option number 1. You have a P90, outfitted with a light and laser and red dot. Option number 2. You have an MP5K. Now, your MP5K, of course, you can also outfit with a light, laser, and any type of optic as you like. All weapon systems in this scenario are fully automatic, equipped with lights, lasers, red dots, and suppressors as needed. Now for this scenario, you may carry as much ammunition as you can manage, and you also have access to a PVS-14 night vision unit, 2 flashbangs, and 1 smoke grenade. Now, since body armor is considered a norm for NGOs in this region, wearing body armor should not raise any suspicion. Your undercover security contractors in Gaza, currently, however, are only armed with pistols. But who knows what you can find in tunnels, as long as you make sure that they are not booby-trapped. Now, for this scenario, we've got Ashley, a US Army infantry officer turned simulations officer, who will join us for the discussion. Now, Ashley was our subject matter expert for the podcast episode that we did on subterranean warfare, and she herself has multiple publications on the topic of subterranean military operations. Now, as you evaluate which one is your primary weapon, keep in mind the overall weight, the size that you can travel undercover with, and remember you still need to covertly pack food, water, cash, comms, and more ammunition. Think of the terrain and the characteristics of fighting from the streets to the tunnels, in case trouble does touch off. Now we look forward to hearing from you guys. Is it going to be the P90, or will it be the MP5K PDW? I don't know. But don't forget to leave your comment in the comment section of this video. That's how we find interesting talking points to discuss in a live stream. But even more so, don't forget to vote for either the P90 or the MP5K PDW under the community page on our YouTube channel. Now, under that poll, we will pull the results on the day of the live stream and see what you guys as a collective entity has chosen. Now, the time and date of the live stream will be revealed shortly in the comment section of this video. But
Право. Есть загорание 2 крайних диодов центральных смен. Нейтраль погасли. Рут влево. Есть загорание 2 крайних диодов. В центре не горят. Нейтраль погасла.
Ladies and gentlemen, here we are after a long while, Josh. It's been more than a year, I think, since the last pick one that we've done.
But so many people have asked us to bring pick one back. That might be the most requested content that we have had over the last year since we did the last one.
Yeah, indeed. And I think one of the things that really pushed this one along was Ashley and we did a podcast a couple months ago or earlier this year. No, it was earlier this year. We did a podcast. And so one of the main topic that we talked about was subterranean warfare and how absolutely horrid of a nightmare fuel scenario that would be. And so, of course, like any regular normal people, I wrote a nightmare fuel scenario for us to talk about.
Yes, this one would be maximal suck to actually be on the executing side of such an operation.
Yeah. So for those who are joining us, welcome. My name is Henry. I am the co-host of Nine Hole Reviews. Here joined on the screen, you'll see underneath, Josh. You can say hi.
Hi. I am also a co-host of Nine Hole Reviews, but more importantly, Ashley, please feel free to introduce yourself. Thank you so much for joining to run through what will be hopefully a fairly interesting, thought-provoking scenario.
Nope. Ashley, I do have, experience as a military officer, kind of diverse background there, but I'm here primarily as just a gun nerd and as a doctrine and strategy and operational environment nerd. Published a couple things on subterranean warfare, and again, just all around gun nerd, and looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah. So before we even dive into the firearms, though, we start these things off with a situation brief, as you might add. But even before that, I wanted to draw everyone's attention a little bit to this lovely image that I photographed specifically for this pick one. You'll see a lot of little small things, little small trinkets that I sprinkled in there specific to the location. A cheap Turkish rug. Actually, I bought that in Afghanistan. It was like really cheap Turkish rugs that they had to cover up some like dirty places. The MP5K and the P90, of course. But look at the brand of ammunition, right? Local delights with the Jericho 941 laying right next to it. But more so, laying next to the US dollars, you've got some Egyptian pounds, a pack of Egyptian Cleopatra branded cigarettes, and a Mossad assassination pistol. I'm sorry, a Mossad 22 target pistol. And then behind it, we'll get into this later on in this debrief, you'll see that there are some boxes of 5.7 ammunition, of which 2 of those are Fiocchi subsonic branded ammunition. I didn't want to really drag it out too much, but I even had to do a shorts on that because so many people were saying that there's no subsonic 5.7s. However, we're getting a little too far into the weeds. Let's talk about the situation. And the situation right here is dire, my friends. So, talking about where we were, we'll go through talking about the mission, some key players that we have, the terrain that we're dealing with, any troops that we have on hand that we could work with, time considerations, time hacks that we need to fill, and civilian considerations to close that one out. So our primary mission that we're looking for, of course, is to extract Sarah from her current location, bring her to the seaboard for exfil into Cyprus. Secondarily, and kind of how it plays into the entire scenario, you've got 3 undercover contractors that are actually stuck within the borders of Gaza. And you're trying to also exfil them. And during this operation, you're kind of knocking out 2 birds with 1 stone. This is our primary subject, Sarah Cohen, 19 years old. A young lady was attending a concert and was abducted into Gaza. Now, on-ground intel has shown a very probable location that we'll talk about the abandoned school in a bit. But this is your primary mission, primary subject for your primary mission. This is just to orient everybody to the location, and I need to snap out of the military style briefing. But you can see where Israel is, right northeast of the Sinai Peninsula. And then you've got Lebanon on top and Jordan to the east. The western seaboard, you'll see, is a corridor to go over to Cyprus, which is to the northwest of Israel itself. Primarily, we're going to be working near Gaza. You can see that is towards the center bottom of this map. And if we get a little closer, we can look at, this is the olive grove area. This is the olive grove that we're running into in Erez, which is right on the border next to the checkpoint that we're going to infiltrate across. We're going to cross into this checkpoint, the Erez crossing point, into Gaza itself, and then traverse down to Isbat Beit Hanun to find the tunnel entrance. Now, in this location, this is where you'll meet your first contractor that you have over there, and that contractor will journey down to meet the other two near the tunnel entrance in Isbat Beit Hanun. And unfortunately, this is the only way to go into the objective location, which is an abandoned schoolhouse. And so we'll get into the key players for a little bit. Key players are not helping you whatsoever on either side. On the left two images, you'll see some Hamas fighters, the Palestinian contingency. And on the right side, you'll see you've got the IDF. So obviously, Sarah is being held in Hamas-controlled territory. And if money were to release her, money would have already released her. That is not going to happen, to just use money to release her. On the right side, you have the IDF that is actively prohibiting you from going into Gaza, crossing the checkpoint, or traversing through and within Israel proper with any of the weapon systems that you're going to pack. That is the reason why you have to go through all of this with some form of concealment. Otherwise, a better option, obviously, is going to be using something with a little bit more oomph behind it. So, the terrain, what are we looking at? We're looking at actually a fairly diverse terrain. Outside in Israel, where we're meeting our contact, the Israeli colonel, is near an olive grove. And near the olive grove, it's going to be largely an arid, open field. You can see on the top right, that is actually on the Palestinian. That's not actually, it looks like an olive grove on the Palestinian side. But that is the wall that separates Israel and Palestine. On the left side, you'll see checkpoint Erez. So those are going to be heightened security areas. So expect a very high security, especially during this time frame after the October 7th attacks, before the Israelis are conducting any ground operations. The checkpoints are going to be the major choke points that deny any access in or out of Gaza. On the bottom right, you'll see an image of what Gaza looks like up until this point on October 21st. Highly dense location. Some places have, unfortunately, been lower densitied by the the IDF Air Force. So you're going to see a lot of rubble. You're going to see typically buildings under 15 stories tall, typically around the 5 to 8 story tall buildings. Lots of concrete, lots of buildup, but city planning is not a priority. Part of the terrain is also going to be a network of subterranean tunnels, which is a main consideration, a main problem that we're trying to tackle right now. These tunnels could span for hundreds and hundreds of meters going in. Interesting thing, looking at some of these tunnels, and you'll see through this image, one thing that I picked up is unlike some other tunnels, defensive tunnels that were planned out that have turns and curves in them, you actually see a lot of long distances in these tunnels, which present itself to be an extremely dangerous, potential extremely hostile linear danger areas that you're just like constantly trying to traverse. Cover is a rarity in some parts of these tunnels, so maneuverability and speed is going to be your friend. One thing, let me go back to the key players slide. Intel also suggests, as you guys heard, is that the strength of security has decreased about 70%. So it's about 30% security right now in some of those tunnels. And a lot of that is due to the bombings that created the bottom right picture that you see right there. And so you can see this is the rough layout of the tunnel according to your intelligence support reports, and those are directly given you by your separately given to you by your 3 contractors that are on ground through SatPhone. And since they are going into these tunnels with you, you would presume that these reports are as accurate as they could figure out. Now, your contractors are actually fairly capable. You've got Alex, who has a law enforcement, a legal background, but is all 3 of them are basically highly proficient and former some form of top tier law enforcement or military unit personnel. However, all 3 of them are armed with only pistols. Time considerations, you are looking at 48 hours. So it's not a lot of time to dilly-dally and hang out. At the end of this, of course, we've got civilian considerations. Now, this is an active war zone. There are civilians everywhere. A lot of displaced civilians. You're talking about people who lived here literally weeks ago and were just minding their own business going to work. Now their homes are gone. They are trying to get from point A to point B. Desperate mothers, desperate fathers trying to get their families away. You're talking about hospitals that are overwhelmed and infrastructure within the city that is no longer working. And so, all in all, the scenario is most certainly not great. And so, you guys have anything to add to our current assessment right now?
Ashley, how close was Henry's opener there to an actual current military brief? I mean, was it dry enough? Did we hit the right level of cadence?
No, it's actually worse in real life.
Not even close. That's more equivalent to what we would call, like a rant brief. Anyways, no, but military briefs are a lot more painful. And yeah, again, the big thing for me is the scenario, is not as important, as it is a creative way to frame a very, very unique problem set through which to assess 2 weapon systems. And that's the perspective, that I come at it. And I think that it did a good job of that.
Yeah, if we were to do an actual 5-paragraph op-ed brief, I think our viewership count on this is probably going to drop 90%. And then the last 70%, you would kind of wonder, like, why the hell are you guys here? Because probably half of them are foreign intel assets trying to see if this is actually something real that the military is planning.
Right. Well, and then there's the whole, if you're actually going underground, you have to forecast for, 30% casualties every 12 hours. So in an urban AO, we would have to count on losing one of our team. You would want to look at a 3-to-1 scenario, 3-to-1 ratio in the offense. There's all kinds of legal policy and other things that would probably restrict a lot of things from this scenario. But again, what we have is a very creative way to outline a bunch of requirements through which we can assess these weapons and see what we think would be best for this theoretical scenario.
Sounds good.
All right. anything else that we have that we want to talk about as far as the intro?
I want to talk about that.
All right. So next portion we're going to jump into is what we picked. And then you ready?
Да, принято. Контролируем автоматическое сближение. Дальность, да. 50 метров. Предельная скорость сближения. 1.2 на сближение.
All right. So our picks. I didn't have to do that, but it's a nice kind of bookend to get into our picks. Now, obviously, both of these are my personal things, but going into this, quite frankly, these two in this specific scenario, I felt they had different strengths and weaknesses that almost kind of like overlapped and covered each other's strengths and weaknesses. So unfortunately, you aren't going with a partner, because if you had a partner and you had both of these things, that would be ideal in bringing both of them, right? But in this scenario, in this pick one scenario, you're trying to travel light, keep it concealed enough to pass through, both Israel proper all the way to the checkpoint and really not get flagged that you're going in there for work, let's call it. Of these two, Josh, you know how much of an MP5 nut I am. I think that it is one of the best iterations for CQB stuff. And at the same time, Josh also knows how much I geek out about the P90 and MP7 projects that transpired through the NATO trials. Because those trials actively went to hit some of the drawbacks that the MP5s had. Specifically, those trials were made to come up with something that could cover both pistol and MP5 and merge the two capabilities together. But largely we see nowadays is that people never adopted what was put out during the NATO trials, because of course back in the 90s, the MP5 reigned supreme. And then after that, we drifted more towards short barrel rifles rather than a PDW to arm rear echelon troops. That said, both the P90 and the MP7 after that has had extensive use, although not in America, has had extensive use in different units. And instead of using those things in a special operations in a rear echelon capacity, it ended up being dropped into a lot of special operations capacities. More so the MP7 than the P90, I would say, but in some units overseas, it's a big law enforcement and hostage rescue type of firearm. And one of the things that I think right now, if I'm looking at the two of them, you're looking at one that is significantly lighter in terms of ammunition weight, right? And when I'm looking at this whole mission set, I'm thinking about, all right, so what am I going to do? Concealment is going to be a big thing. On that aspect, the MP5, I think, would win out, because you could make it smaller than a P90 and slide it into other, small bags and put stuff over it. You also have the element that you absolutely are going to have to shoot at some point, because 30% security, I think it would be highly unlikely that it would go to a 0% security with a high value target locked away in a room. So I'm looking at potentially still needing to breach. But my concern is actually not as much on the street level initially, because I still want to conceal as I'm going through the street level. If you get into a street fight with either one of these two and the enemy is running AKs, you're laying down fire to break contact. You're not progressing towards it. So my main thought process on this, as I would choose either one of these things, is the tunnel portion and the breach, both of those. And these two being fully automatics kind of answer, they both fulfill the piece going into the breach. Like, I very happy to have fully automatics to run a breach. especially with the high capacity magazines. Or, excuse me, standard capacity magazines, that is. But my concern is, as I'm going into the tunnels, I'm looking at those tunnels. I've seen so many of those images of them. You're looking at 20, 50-meter long engagements going all the way down. Some of them look like even longer than that. Of the two, the two firearms here that I've shot, I actually have a better time hitting with the P90 than I am with the MP5, because a lot of times if you're looking at this and you're saying, hey, the P90's terminal ballistics is pretty poor, I think the 50 rounds on tap kind of solves a part of that problem, especially when you have light armor piercing capabilities with the SS-190 projectiles. So with all that said, despite my long-time love affair with the MP5K and thinking that the MP5K is actually a phenomenal general purpose PDW to use for a 50-25 meter break contact engagement for this one, because I have to go through the tunnels with long distances that I'm trying to cover, because I have to use a firearm that potentially has to turn really tight corners. And if you look at where you're gripping on the P90, it's actually shorter than if you press a pistol out, you're actually covering more ground in front of you to peek around corners. The P90 is actually tighter because your hand is right here. It's literally right in front of your face how far you can go. I think for this instance, I would pick the P90 for a focus on good enough for concealment in a bag, and I could cover a lot of the grounds there. Now, one thing I think that people talked about the P90 versus MP5, I think people talked about the magazines. Yeah, the P90 magazines are really long and pretty awkward to carry, quite frankly. You don't really have a lot of tack vests that could carry that. But if I'm supposed to be somewhat concealed, I would presume that my magazines are probably in like a little like side messenger bag, a sack or something like that. Anyways, and on top of that, look at this. 50 rounds of P90 ammo on the left. And this is in grams, by the way, because, it's easier for people to understand that there was one number bigger and one number smaller. 50 rounds of P90 ammunition is actually significantly lighter than 30 rounds of MP5, 124 grain MP5 standard ammunition. And I believe the SS-190 is even lighter than the 40 grain civilian AMAX ammo that you see right here. So if you are in, this is not metric, I'm sorry. That should be imperial up there. But 1 pound, 1.3 ounces for a fully loaded P90 magazine with 50 rounds versus a 30 round MP5 magazine at 1 pound, 4.2 ounces. Meaning I could carry a lot more in my little side messenger bag or, my sack that I have on the side, and still be able to push through and have more ammunition, because I'm not looking at resupply. I'm not looking at battlefield pickups, obviously. So P90 is my choice. What do you think?
Well, Henry, I'll go next, but I begrudgingly also went with the P90, and I know that the chat is going to lose their minds knowing that you, the lover of MP5s himself, went with the P90 option. I mean, it hurt somebody somewhere very deeply, Henry. Okay, but I also am going with P90 for a few main considerations in addition to what you've mentioned. But the primary reason here for me, above and beyond what you've already outlined, is the one-handed operation, which I find much easier on the P90. And in a scenario where I at some point may be trying to manage a hostage or an HVT as part of an extraction, I think having a free hand while still being able to run the gun effectively probably is a consideration here that comes into play. So for me, I am also P90 gang this time.
Now, I think that's a big thing. Actually, Ashley and I talked before this, like even before pick one and everything. We talked about the P90, like the MP7 and the P90. Both of these firearms, quite frankly, are single hand machines. You can shoot them extended single hand or shouldered single hand. I mean, the MP7 you have to extend the stock, but compared to the MP5 series, you've all seen the images of the SAS breaching into the embassy. Obviously, that is common knowledge. We talk about it over dinner all the time, right? Like in that instance, when they were repelling, I would imagine that it would be a lot easier to have something that is more well balanced before they did a breach, and especially if they were like going in after you did the breach, after the tangos have been put down, corralling, the HVTs and trying to rustle someone out. I think people didn't really talk about the single hand use as much as I thought, but some did in the comments section, which we will visit. So with that said, Ashley, are you the savior for the MP5 lovers in chat? Let me build this up a little bit first, all right? So like Ashley and I are both very good friends with James Williamson over at Teufelsson Tactical. James is an H&K. He surpasses the aficionado side. He is he's on the Jedi Master side of using H&Ks, from both the doctrinal employment all the way down to the actual employment and instructing people to using stuff. In fact, Ashley, you did a lot of work with James at his MP5 courses, didn't you?
Correct. Yeah, it was. So I'm looking at the certificate right now. It was in March of this year. Here,
yeah,
23.
Which inspired you to also obtain an MP5 of your liking. But don't pick it up. We can't pick it up on live stream.
I am aware. I'm at it longingly.
And yours kind of looks like the one that I use around as a bedside. It's the Sicario one with it's sort of like a Sicario looking MP5 with a collapsible stock and a CAC rail in the front. So Ashley is a huge MP5 fan, I would surmise, right?
Yes.
But anyways, like, sorry, I wanted to put that together, just because I know people may not know Ashley from the MP5 side. On her social media side, it's like full of AR-180s, Bren guns, and AKs. So there's that.
So, I think it was Josh mentioned that Henry was going to hurt a lot of people's feelings by turning on the MP5 for the P90.
It's not turning on the MP5. Stop calling it that. I love them both.
So it hurt my feelings. And then it doubly hurt my feelings because I have to reference, one of me and Henry's favorite operators, our boy Sam, and say, so the only proper response when asked about your weapons preference is it's a toolbox. You put the tools in for the job. And
for those who don't know that's from Ronin. Sam was Robert De Niro's character. Anyways, yes. So
I love the MP5, and I love the MP5K. I love the MP5 in all of its forms. For this scenario specifically, I would choose the P90 because I do believe, and I'm going to make it very quick because the major points Henry and Josh already hit. But I do believe for this discrete scenario, it is the right tool for the job. For any other scenario, I would choose the MP5K or another MP5 variant over the P90. But it's the collapsed tunnel, the ability to operate one-handed, because it's not just a tunnel, it's a collapsed tunnel. Operating in confined spaces, it's not only can you shoot the gun one-handed, it's the profile, and it's also how collapsed is how compact is the manual of arms. With the P90, everything you need to operate is right here. You don't have to have same hand movements. And then again, in a close quarters, scenario, the more rounds you have in your magazine, just that number by itself, not only the weight, but that number is important because that gives you some flexibility and some options when you're facing opponents that will more than likely be using 30 rounds. So when fractions of a second and all those factors are magnified in a very, very tight confined space, those extra rounds are insanely important. So
everybody has picked P90 here. Now, before chat loses its mind, there is still an opportunity. Okay. There may be a let's just call it a surprise guest or two that might have something to say about this. But before we get to that, Ashley, just a few quick questions from me. Within the scope of your experience with the subterranean zone, I suppose, if you'd call it that, what type of considerations are there surrounding super and subsonic within such a tight enclosed space? And I come from this from the perspective of, the most that I've done with respect to shooting in tight spaces is indoor ranges, which suck. And then tighter than that was inside of a vehicle, which sucked way more. And I can only sort of imagine that level of suck continues to increase as you go.
So what I can say is underground. Well, again, we could caveat this to death, so I'll try to just keep it very general.
Sure.
You could get into, okay, well, it's going to be how big is the tunnel? What material, is the walls made out of? Like, we're going to keep it focused. The bottom line is, I would say, generally speaking, it's going to be comparable to shooting inside a vehicle, but I mean, also with like windows closed. So the biggest factor, subsonic and supersonic, is what I would say is primary is it's going to affect your ability to communicate. And it's also going to affect your security because muzzle flashes are a thing. You're usually operating in a low visibility scenario. So if you can minimize your muzzle flash, that's going to be a good factor. Your ability to communicate as a team, because, warfighting is a team sport. It's not, like no John Wicks in the world, even though we are kind of talking a John Wicky scenario, but I'll keep it focused. The ability to communicate with your team is huge. And any way that you can reduce the noise, which is already going to be compounded by the confined space, is going to be a critical force multiplier, which you can also use things like headsets, other ways to mitigate. And then the last thing is it's going to be distracting. The larger the concussion you have from the weapons, which these are short barrel PDWs, the more concussion, it's going to be kind of a distractor. And it elevates from, okay, so a gun just went off like near me, like if you're operating in like a normal building, and you've got somebody shooting right over your shoulder and you can kind of hear that snap and feel the little, kiss of that vapor wave on your neck. Like it kind of makes you flinch if you're not initiated and conditioned to it. It's going to be way worse. Everything just gets amplified underground. So the concussion, the vibrations you're going to feel on kind of exposed skin and, kind of in your body can be a distracting factor. And so in an already confusing scenario, you have weapons fire kicking up dust. So your visibility is probably already bad. It's getting worse. You have noises that are preventing you from effectively communicating with your team, at least verbally, hand and arm signals, ways to mitigate it, but the ability to mitigate how the actual concussion, and signature of the weapon being fired affects the team is going to be a force multiplier. That's really the main consideration when it comes to not necessarily just supersonic or subsonic or suppressed versus unsuppressed, but just the kind of reports of the weapons being fired underground.
Mm-hmm. So one thing I want to sort of also bring back to Ashley, our conversation on sub-T operations. We were talking about the importance of being able to suppress. And actually, at first, you were talking about potentially wanting to push belt feds if you were running a larger operation in a sub-T, like a military operation, like actually going down to clear tunnels, right?
Yeah.
I think in context, the P90 here is probably as close to that type of higher volume suppression that you could get of the two. And that was actually one of my thoughts, was that especially if you suppress it, and that way it's got less effect on you and your team going in. But being able to hose, like broom someone, ironically, broom is the nickname for the MP5K. But
Yeah.
if you could like broom people to kind of keep them at bay as you're going down that 50 meter, 70 meter stretch, the more ammo you could sling down that long distance as you're making an approach, that's what I was thinking about betting on, to be honest. And then afterwards, if it comes to like popping up top and concealing, if you're made on the surface, the P90s, you're not going to have a very good time, probably. So concealment is honestly secondary. Like right now, having to go down those tunnels and having to suppress, having to push forward, having to clear a room with potentially multiple tangos with a truncated team, that leads me to the option that I can carry more ammunition and have less reloads in between. That's really one of the big considerations that I took. It's less so what is the ballistic performance on a body. It's more so what kind of volume of fire can I put down and continue to progress for me. So
Well,
we do have.
Well, Henry, before we get there, I think you hit on a good point, which has been brought up. I saw in a bunch of comments, which is when you go to the subsonic, right, on the P90, the round becomes basically a glorified 22. Whether or not that is true, TBD. But we know that this round has been rounds like it between this and what is it, the 4.6 or the
4.6,
right?
the HK's 4.6
or have been utilized heavily in this type of environment, or in close range or snatch and grabs and hits by special operations forces throughout the last 10 to 15 years, without a doubt. And again, the effectiveness there, questionable. So, but with that said, it's not like 9mm is going to 300 blackout. Like, I think that was probably a key distinction. Like, there isn't a 300 blackout gun here, which would have been potentially a more desirable pick for me, if it were me, in if we could fit it into sort of the size and weight parameters that we wanted to operate in here.
It also annoys me when if there were a scenario, it would annoy me that you're taking 300 blackout into AK land. Like, that annoys. I don't know why. It just annoys me. But Ashley, by the way, I think you disappointed Ian. So, anyways, so we do have some guest contributions coming up from some fellow content creators that I asked them beforehand. But I wanted one thing when I talked to one of my good friends over in Russia, Victor, and he and I were discussing, hey, where would these things come from? And actually, being in the arms industry, the both of us kind of started working out different locations that an MP5 could come from, which, quite frankly, anywhere for the MP5. But the closest probably would be like contract guns that came from Turkey, from that region, because the MKE, obviously, both Josh, you and I have MKE MP5s. Yes. But the P90, though, it was actually used in quite a few PSDs for Middle Eastern countries. And the closest one to Israel, you would say that around 2009, there were a couple hundred units that ran loose in Libya. So these things could be in the region on the black side, but potentially, if you're a security contractor anyways, you probably also have your means for, stuff to be purchased on the open side. But coming up, we've got 3 content creators that we wanted to also talk about. First, I want to start off with Jeff. What do you say? Jeff Gerwich, former special operations, special forces operator. Jeff, during the global war on terror, spent a lot of time on operations in the Middle East. Well, every special operations guy spent a lot of time in the Middle East back then. But specifically, Jeff's also spent a lot of time with the MP5, the MP7, not the P90, but the MP7, and also other subguns like the UMP and so forth. So Jeff, I asked him to put a contribution in. You guys ready to hear what he says? See if he reinforces us or not?
All right, P90 versus an MP.
Uh-oh. Did it stop?
Yeah.
Here, let me try to start it back over. Here, let me try to re-put that one together. I'm so sorry about that. Here we go.
All right, P90 versus an MP5K for a subterranean mission. Well, if we look at the two side by side on paper, basically size and weight, they're the same. Ammo-wise, of course, the P90 holds more with a 50-round mag, and the performance of that 5.7 round, it does have a lot better range, but that's not really going to be a factor fighting in tunnels. And of course, the 5.7 military round does defeat soft body armor, something 9mm cannot do. But I would have to base my decision really on my experience. I've shot the P90. I think it has a dismal trigger. And the magazine, the top loading, I'm not really a fan of that. It's kind of an oddball thing. And I've carried the MP5 on numerous deployments in the early days of Iraq. So I'm very familiar with the MP5. I know the MP5 pretty well. And that is really going to be the point of my decision. I'm going to take the MP5 based on my experience. And for the anemic stopping power of 9mm, I would just shoot the MP5K the way submachine guns are meant to be shot, and that's on full auto. Presented with a threat, you give them P for plenty, and you drive that threat down with a full auto burst. And for a loadout, I would carry at least a dozen magazines. MP5 mags are pretty slim. You can fit 2 per M4 mag pouch, so I'd carry a dozen magazines, giving me well over 300 rounds for any threats I might come across. So MP5K for the win.
All right, so that was Jeff Gurwitch over at Modern Tactical. You can find his handle down in the description below. But Jeff is actually experienced in both, and it seems like he chose the MP5 with his familiarity with it. Being an early GWOT guy, obviously they had a lot of training on the MP5. Like I said, I mean, these are difficult choices. At least for me, it was a difficult choice between the two. I've owned the P90 for a while, so I understand the like I've worked it for a little bit longer, so it's different if you had a like a training bias towards one or the other, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly been something that in the past I've always gravitated in these sort of conversations to be like, oh, I know how to use this gun way better. I'm way more familiar with this particular setup. I would go with that. And I've tried to regress from that position to sort of, I suppose, play the game of the scenario a little bit more, assuming that I am skilled with everything equally. One thing that's interesting, though, and I would agree completely with Jeff on, is the triggers. I hate the P90 trigger. It does suck a lot, like a lot.
Well, so I would say if I were running the P90, I would just rotate it to the last position most of the time for me. And so that it's actually interesting too, you know, because the P90 is a progressive trigger. So it's like the AUG, you know, your first half click is a semi, and then if you squeeze it all the way, it's full auto. So you're right. Some people may not be used, and I'm not used to that on the automatic side because all my stuff are semis, right? Mm-hmm. But yeah, that would take some time to get used to. And if you're not used to it, you're better off with a traditional layout selector like the MP5.
What do you think about just before
sorry.
All right, P90 versus an MP.
Oh, you gave away our next guest. Just really quick, I thought on Jeff's volume of ammunition. Like, I assume that's coming from a point of experience, right? Like that doesn't, like, I'm assuming it's based upon what he was rolling with during his time in Iraq. but 12 mags sounds like a crap load to try to carry into a scenario like this, or to be like lugging through a blown out tunnel. Again, maybe that's I need to go to gym more gym. But I don't know. That sounds like a lot of mags. I understand why. If you got into a fight in this type of scenario, you're going to be like going deep on the ammo. But I mean, what do you guys think on that?
That reinforces what I want with the 50 rounds on tap, lighter ammunition, less reloads to go forward. Like for the same carry weight, I could carry more than 12, quite frankly. Because you're looking at what, almost 500 grams versus almost 600 grams. 12 of that, 13.2. Yeah, so that would be 13.2 kilos that you're running around with, right? Like that's brutal.
Does seem like a lot. But again, I think he's the point on the size of the mags. Absolutely. Like you can fit more MP5 mags than P90 mags, right? The P90 mags are ginormous oddball things that are very hard to actually like fit into anything.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it is. But then on my, that was a point of contention because, are you going to stick it on your body armor, like on yourself, or you can carry it in a bag? Like with a P90, there's no way that your decision is made for you. Like you cannot stick it on your body. Maybe one out of the back pocket, but that's like it. Like do a pocket reload with a P90. I mean, yeah, ammunition concerns I think are absolutely a thing, but it comes down, like for me, the weight is the weight and the capacity is going to be the big thing. It's the closest thing to a belt fed that I could fit down there with concealment.
All right. What do you say? On to everybody's new favorite influencer.
Oh yeah, I mean the young nut and fancy Brock Brass Facts. I mean, some guys say things about Brass. I actually rather like listening to his videos because he goes through these mental exercises a lot. I was really impressed with the way he presented what he thought in his video. And what he sent me was actually just an audio clip. I actually took his other videos and clipped it together to have some visual representation. So you're not just looking at a black screen here. But Brock's thought process is outlined a little longer than what we're usually playing here. But if you're ready, send it.
Hey, it's Brass Facts. I'm picking the MP5K for the task outlined in the Night Holes Pick 1 scenario. Initially, at first glance, the P90 seems like it might be a good fit. Significantly higher ammo capacity, armor penetrating capabilities,
Oh my gosh! Stop! I don't know why I'm doing that. Let me try to reload that thing. I'm so sorry.
I mean, he was making a lot of sense right there.
He was until he like died.
Hey, it's Brass Facts. I'm picking the MP5K for the task outlined in the Night Holes Pick 1 scenario. Initially, at first glance, the P90 seems like it might be a good fit. Significantly higher ammo capacity, armor penetrating capabilities, significantly flatter trajectory means when we're shooting, point of impact, point of aim is pretty flat out, even in urban environments, and we can functionally treat it in a lot of ways like a rifle. Some of the anemic terminal performance of the 5.7 round can also be overcome with rate of fire and modern non-FMJ selections, which civilians have access to, being outside of the military circle. Being a Tupperware with worse ergonomics, the P90 is also pretty light, especially when you consider total ammo loadout, compared to the much heavier 9mm. As Cave Johnson said, you're getting roughly 3 times more bullet per bullet. That being said, I'm going with the MP5K here. In a collapsed non-suppressed configuration, while heavy, it is significantly shorter at about 13 to 14 inches overall length compared to the P90's 20-inch overall length. That means the MP5K can be realistically on-body carried and concealed, while the P90 almost certainly, at 20 inches overall length, needs to be overt or off-body. That's not going to fly in this scenario. While both are quiet with a suppressor, subsonic booms almost certainly mean 5.7 is significantly louder. And subsonic 5.7 is completely stupid, defeating the entire functionality of the round, resulting in a both slow and small round. The MP5K, however, configured with 147 grain HSTs or whatever jacketed hollow point of choice, or perhaps some of that fancy G9 ammo, and you have a natively subsonic weapon with no relative loss in performance compared to your supersonic 124 and 115 grains. I'll get more onto why we want something like that a bit later, but moving on, because I have the recursive power to dictate things at my convenience, because this is a made-up encounter, the specific NGO I'm a part of is one of the medical NGOs already operating in Gaza at the time of this event. Attire is going to be pretty loud, in the sense that it's going to be bright, probably orange, probably a lot of reds, because we're going to be working for a medical NGO, though I'm going to be sure to kind of structure it in a way that most of that loudness, so to speak, comes from a donnable non-armored vest that I can put on and off quite easily. These vests that these NGOs typically wear are mass-produced by the lowest bidder, and they fit no one and look like shit. It will not be hard to hide an MP5K unsuppressed under my armpit with 20 rounds concealed. Throw in a couple medical face masks into my pocket, and the disguise, hopefully, is complete. I'll also be rolling with a semi-collapsed soft stretcher, once again orange color. The stretcher will be preloaded with MREs in their full boxes, light first aid kits, and bottled water. It will also contain other vests, basically the clothes I'm wearing, in similar coloring, red, orange, and a bunch of medical face masks. Should the semi-full stretcher be examined on the street, it should be good to go at cursory glance. Some of the MREs within the packed box are actually gutted out, and the MP5 broken down fits into the bottom of the MRE crate, and the fire control group or whatever can be removed and shoved into a partially gutted MRE bag. Several of the other MREs, specifically the Veged Omelette ones, because giving those out would be an actual war crime, will be gutted and receive pistol mags, MP5K mags, etc. It will not be unreasonable to +2 all of the recon teammates with whatever handguns they are running, and to bring 2, maybe 3 MP5 mags, probably 120 and 130 or 230s. Also within the main bag is some more medical, actual, tactical blowout kit medical style stuff, PVS-14s once again mashed into an MRE bag. Other innocuous stuff like gas station maps, GPS Garmin style devices, and 3 flashlights will be brought along. We'll throw in some glow sticks in a second small box labeled for the kids, because kids love playing with glow sticks, am I right? We'll probably bring 2, maybe 3 DMR-style radios to hand out to the recon team when we make contact with them. As the brief seems to indicate, the cellular network is jacked. The reason for all this effort and moving stuff off-body, even though, for example, the MP5 carries on-body quite effectively, is as we roll up to the IDF checkpoint and push that initial couple hundred yards into Gaza itself, we're going to be under extreme scrutiny, and the ability to survive a body check, for example, at the checkpoint, is going to be critical, right? As we move into Gaza itself, we can begin moving stuff back on-body. I think the objective of this loadout is fairly straightforward and obvious. We're attempting to blend in with a disguise that matches what others in the area would be wearing at the time of our complexion, so on and so forth, right? A lot of bombs have been exchanged. There are going to be NGOs on ground. We're attempting to blend in with that, and that allows us to move overtly during the day without arousing too much suspicion. Upon meeting my IDF contact, we head to the checkpoint, where one of the recon dudes is waiting for me, either at the gate or slightly far away from the gate, depending on the situation. Now, I know the area by heart. 7 million is a pretty strong incentive and motivator for studying the shit out of it, but it's good to have someone who's been in the AO for the last couple of weeks. Time is incredibly of the essence. We want to move as soon as we're in the AO. He helps me carry the soft stretcher, we move out of sight, he puts on one of the vests, and now he looks like one of my NGO medical homies. We proceed to where the rest of the recon team is, near the tunnel entrance. At this point, as we arrive to the tunnel entrance, I'll admit I tried rule-lowering my way around this one to avoid going in the tunnel and maybe go through an alt entrance, but Henry told me in no uncertain terms, get in the tunnel, Brock. This is the only known entrance, which, fair enough. So out comes the MP5K, suppressor goes on, pistol mags get handed around, flashlights get handed around. We remove our NGO clothing, and into the tunnel we go. A saving grace is almost certainly that it is unpowered due to nearby JDAM strikes, poor infrastructure, and if there is powered, wires almost certainly lead from the outside into the tunnel at the entrance in a very unelegant fashion instead of the tunnel pulling power directly from the grid. So, as we roll in, snip the bitch. Our advantage here is that the PVS-14 with the illuminator or weapon-mounted lamp clicked on means we have a pretty strong competitive advantage in a pitch-black tunnel if power is cut. Unfortunately, the reality of tunnel fighting means this part either mostly goes off without a hitch or we're all probably dead. So, in this universe, we didn't die. The hope is that we eventually roll up to where our VIP is being held and with minimal or no struggle are able to subdue her guards, and then we get the hell out of there. Those aforementioned glow sticks get dropped in such a way that retracing our path, especially with night vision, is significantly easier and this tunnel just doesn't become our grave. This is especially important since we may need to get out of that tunnel real fast. It's unlikely that we'll be able to fully clear the tunnel, so to speak. The stretcher, formerly our cover and carrying device, now carries our VIP. Chances are she's going to slow us down and we need to get moving. After a quick medical checkup, perhaps some water all around, and ammunition checks, perhaps we want to feed more ammunition to the MP5 and top off mags, perhaps the handguns got used in excess and those need mags topped off. Fortunately, all of our ammo is intercompatible. We exit the same way we came in because looking for an alternate entrance sounds like a terrible idea, and we begin pushing towards extract. As we exit the tunnel, we can begin jettisoning other non-vital gear into a local trash can and resume our charade of being a NGO, now with a wounded girl clearly needing to be rushed to a hospital. The fact that we are actually moving away from the IDF checkpoint further helps sell this. Our medical masks are incredibly useful here to avoid anyone recognizing us, the stress on our face, but also for people stopping us to not recognize her. As we near within a block or two of our evac point, we can consider laying low, waiting for the night, eat some beef enchilada MREs, and then when night hits, jettison all of our bright NGO gear, push the last 500 to 1,000 feet to the water extract point, and get the hell out of here. Now, certainly there are things throughout this magical escapade that might mess our day up. For example, if we're stopped before we reach the tunnel entrance and we get an escort, so to speak, or heavy attention, whatever, we hand out the MREs and RTB, mission abort. We're on razor-thin margins here, and we're going to do more harm than good if our cover is blown before we even get there. Alternative, entrance has 1 to 2 guards. This may also realistically constitute a mission abort, but if locals are not present and it's deemed acceptable, suppressed MP5K here does a trick. More on that in a second. Alternative version is there are civilians close to the tunnel entrance, and we don't want to be seen going into said tunnel entrance. Here we deploy the MREs and water bottles, team breaks into 2, entry team stays nearby, other half distributes MREs out of visual range, water and such, in a comical hope to pull people away from the entrance of the tunnel. Hopefully they like MREs. Should we pick up a tail in the tunnel, which honestly we should probably assume, or perhaps on the street, moving towards a local JDAM strike site could be a good way to lay low for the required amount of time. Remember, the people in the tunnel just know that a bunch of dudes came in, started guns blazing, and then left. Us, now back in our NGO clothing, can go head over to one of these JDAM sites, clear rubble, work with the other local NGOs, our co-workers, and generally begin to blend in, and lay low till it becomes dark and we can push towards the extract point. It's worth noting, the majority use case of our weapons that we bring here is in that tunnel specifically, where frankly the MP5K and P90 have comparable performance. But in the event of above-street usage, the MP5K offers a significantly more signature reduction. 5.7 will almost always carry a loud sonic boom on discharge. The 9mm 147 grains will not, meaning in certain situations that may be mission fail scenarios could be salvaged with a suppressed 9mm. For example, we pick up an escort now after leaving the tunnel from the local militia or military force that want to keep an eye out on us but don't quite understand what has happened yet. We can detour through a back alley, pew pew, no more escort. With an MP5K, subs can reasonably only be recognized at about 50 to 100 yards or so, and if you're indoors, masked behind buildings, whatever, to the nearest onlooker, it might even be further reduced from that. I think there is some temptation to prep for a fight and perhaps pick up indigenous weapons when we're in the tunnel, like a nice AK-74U or whatever, but the reality is the strategy here should be to avoid the fight in the first place instead of prepping a thunder run halfway across the city. Especially since we may win that first fight, but due to our configuration, we're probably going to lose the second one. Sort of Black Hawk Down-esque where, we neutralized a certain amount of target, but now we have the whole city collapsing on our position. The MP5 gives us the option, in certain scenarios, to avoid that from occurring.
Now, y'all didn't think that you were going to get a Brass Facts video within the Pick One, did you? And boom, there it is.
It was good. It was good though. I mean, I loved his
Yeah, that was fun. That was
very detailed breakdown of everything. I mean, like I said, I had a hard time picking between either one or the two, but he focused on the even deeper concealment than just hiding something. He was talking about breaking the MP5 down and stowing it into MRE bags, which the P90, even if you break it down, the stock section is larger than the MP5. So that's something that you could not do with a P90. But the P90, I believe, would fit into the base of an MRE case, I believe. Or at least it should be damn close to fitting underneath one. I will say, though, all right, so a comment that had transpired to me talking about it in a short earlier was the whole topic of subsonic P90 ammunition, yay or nay, does it exist? And yes, it exists. Interesting, funny thing is, what's his name? My friend Matt over at Buffman. He does a lot of ballistics reviews. He's a big, I mean, given he's biased, he loves the 5.7 cartridge. When he tested the white tips, he said that the white tips were also penetrating level 3A armor and also penetrating helmets, the subsonics in 5.7. But more so, I would say, if you've ever shot subsonic 5.7s, people are like, oh, that's practically a 22 LR. Have you shot a subsonic 22 LR through a suppressor before? It's incredibly quiet.
Yes.
So even like your MP5 suppressed is quiet, but suppressed 22 takes that to a whole new level.
That's definitely true. Yes, I agree.
So on that note, like when someone's saying, it's the terminal ballistics are terrible. I mean, yeah, if I had to choose between either one of the subs and I had to go with dealing with a meat target, it would be the MP5. But the P90 subs are not absolutely terrible. It's not absolutely useless. Like people were talking about it like it's a BB gun. But I think it's a little better than a BB gun in this sense.
Yeah. Now, two quick questions for me. Ashley, I saw you nodding in agreement with a comment that Brass made on entry and exit points. So
Yes.
Can you walk us through what the rationale is behind that, sort of fleshing through like what he had said and why you're in agreement with it based on your experience?
Absolutely. So one of the biggest things is, I mean, I loved like all of his video. 100% right. If you could avoid contact or not go in the tunnel, that is obviously the option. It's like, rule number one of fighting in a basement, right? It's not hard to understand. You don't want to go underground unless it can't be avoided at all. And if the scenario dictates we have to go underground, then we have to go underground. But the biggest thing is tunnels are mined and trapped as a matter of fact and history. It's not a they may be, it's not a they could be. It is a matter of historical fact that they are traditionally mined and trapped to all unholy hell. So it's, if you actually have an established path to where you're going, anytime that you create, that you have to, you're having to clear more areas instead of back clear, though you're still clearing because you can't secure the area you came from. At least you've already traversed that path and you're kind of mitigating the risk a little bit by having already come from that direction. But if you're entering into a new section of the tunnel, you're just opening a whole other can of worms and risk that it compounds, what could potentially happen. One, how well do you actually know the tunnel layout? Because underground knowledge of the tunnel itself is decisive. You could be going deeper and not towards a way out. There, more opportunities for mines, traps, wires, ambushes, enemy personnel, poor environmental conditions. You want to retrace your steps if at any and all possible.
So as a basic rule, retake known ground wherever possible, as opposed to going like into the complete unknown, just as a general rule. I appreciate we don't talk in absolutes.
Right. I would say in this scenario, you
Okay.
know, the decisions you're going to make are always going to change based on, again, what's going on, what the mission is. You know, the starting brief was kind of laid out as METTC, you know, the mission variables, you've got the operational variables, but more or less, what's going on, what you're trying to accomplish is going to dictate, you know, what the decisions are. But if you're going in to just get something and get out, fastest way is probably going to be go back the way you came, unless there's something that happens that makes that way infeasible.
So that, I think, leads back to one final point, Henry, that I want to hit on before we go to our final guest's submission. But I think, Ashley, you started the conversation by what felt like it was an absolutely astronomical casualty likelihood statistic. Can you walk through that one more time for those who may have joined since then, and sort of talk about what that's based on, and just the general like overt risk that you'd be taking going into a situation like this?
Right. So it's planning factors. And again, they're not absolute, just like, you know, the right decision is never to do X, Y, or Z. It's all going to depend on the situation. But for planning factors, like one of the things that we look at is every 12 hours in a subterranean operation, you can estimate as a planning factor about 30% casualties. Casualties not necessarily being KIA, but again, you know, KWA, WIA, you know, and they're taking 30% of the formation out of the fight every 12 hours, regardless of size. That is a good planning factor to just help you understand the risk that you're assuming by going underground. So again, in such a small scenario, I tend to agree with what BrassFacts said. With a 3-man team, you're probably either going to be fine, or it's going to be, you know, you're going to be completely wiped out. You're living in canalized terrain, and the only cover that you have is really, you know, speed, silence, and then, you know, using your gun for cover. There's not a lot of security or cover to be had underground. So I say that is a general planning factor that we use. And it's to just kind of highlight the mass amount of risk you are assuming by ever going in any sort of subterranean structure.
Crazy.
Well, one thing that Brass was talking about was, you know, cutting the power or not. We talked about this at length during the podcast, because one thing that you could risk if you have power outages is asphyxiation. Like that's what's keeping fresh air in the tunnels.
Oh wow, totally didn't even think of that.
Yeah,
that's
so like,
crazy.
If you do cut the power, you could potentially just like literally kill everyone.
Is that because it's like we were assuming that the tunnel is ventilated with like an electronic fan of some sort that's flowing air?
Yeah, typically if you go to subway systems, that's one of the big big considerations when they're building it. And then on top of that, like it's not just power. If you have a fire in the tunnel, because let's say like you threw a flashbang, right? And it lit up a bunch of I don't know, flares that they had stowed aside, or one of the rockets, and that rocket went off and burned up all the oxygen. Everyone's dead.
Oh, yeah, wow. That's mind-blowing stuff, actually.
Yeah.
And really scary.
Yeah. It's no fun going into a tunnel. That's why right now, current operations, the Israelis are freaked out, because this is the worst case. That's a worst case scenario for fighting ever. As Ashley has brought up the quote from Inglourious Bastards, there's a rule to fighting in basements. You don't. I won't do the full quote, but yeah, you don't.
Crazy.
Yeah. So that when I heard the thing about cutting power, I would be very hesitant on cutting power without any type of a couple 100 meters long tunnel with no power is going to be a problem.
Yeah, I mean, I get it from the idea of like, oh yeah, that makes, if I've got NVGs, like I'm doing that from a capability perspective, like let me flex my superpower that I then have. But then there's this whole other side that I didn't even remotely consider.
Yeah.
Well, so I'll add a caveat to that as well. Again, cutting the power, you could be fine on ventilation. You could not be. There's ways to. We've had tunnels for a long time. Subterranean warfare has been going on since the Assyrians. So there are ways to ventilate tunnels without using electrical power, but electrical power is also the most common. So you could be fine. You could not be fine. The other thing too is body armor and night vision used to be like a U.S. Western military power decisive advantage. Now it's all over the world. Everybody has body armor and night vision capabilities. So if you cut the power to the tunnel, and it goes from a illuminated environment to a not low illumination but zero illumination.
Zero,
So
right?
the night vision operates by like amplifying that passively amplifying the light. So you have to run the illuminators that he talked about. Well, if anybody in that tunnel has illuminators, they are going to see you coming instantly. You have lost all sense of security before you ever make contact. So that's one of the huge risks with operating in the dark in those tunnels is the enemy has nods. You're forced to use illuminators if you want to use night vision like PVS-14, because there's no natural light or any other type of light to amplify.
Well, the thing is, they don't even need night vision because a lot of these tunnels, they have surveillance systems that pick up infrared light sources.
Also, so are we saying then that the general consideration here is actually probably not to, like, if we role play the scenario opposed to the pick one, right, and we go to a role play like Brassfax did, do we say that like cutting the power actually no, probably worse, because then people know like why is my power off? Like I'm now on alert and I might not have been on alert before. Is that an honest consideration then that it might be right not to cut the power?
Yeah, I mean, role-playing the scenario, I probably wouldn't cut the power.
Cool.
You're causing, I mean, that would be my choice because you're causing an interruption in kind of the natural state of things, which could be an indicator, could be not, but people are definitely going to be alerted to that interruption. And again, no cover, almost all terrain underground is canalized. And then you're inviting more chances for things to go wrong in an already complicated scenario. You're inviting the opportunity for ventilation to maybe be an issue. You're inviting the opportunity for maybe your IR illuminator, to compromise you before you make contact. Whereas if you leave it on, they can see you, you can see them, but at least you may buy yourself some time with the element of surprise. And I'm not going to say you don't have to worry about the ventilation issue, but it's probably less of a concern.
Interesting. All right.
Yeah.
Henry, what do you say? Shall we run our final guest?
We can. And after that, I want to talk about the usage of potentially using grenades in a very confined space. But so our next guest was not actually planned. I received a text message as I was putting together the final things for the pick one, and I got just his pick. I was like, oh, is that how you feel about things? And I promptly asked him if he could film a video, if he would like to film a video, and we could put it online. But right now I'm waiting for the little wheel to load his video. Here we go. Stand by.
Pour cette situation, vous avez besoin d'une pistolet mitrailleur très pliable, comme le Hotchkiss. Ouais? Okay, no, the Hotchkiss Universal is a terrible gun. Between the two choices, I would take the MP5K. I think it is both actually smaller to pack. When you fold or collapse the stock and take the suppressor off, it's actually smaller than the P90. And it has better terminal performance, which isn't saying a whole lot, although especially if you can get good defensive ammunition in 9x19, it's pretty effective, especially compared to the 5.7 of the P90. Now, to the best of my knowledge, Hamas doesn't tend to wear body armor. That would make a difference here, but going on the assumption that they don't, I would rather have 30 rounds of 9mm than 50 rounds of 5.7. because I think you're going to need a lot more of that 5.7 if you have to use it. Presumably, we have enough ammunition here to accomplish the mission, but if for some reason you don't, the 9mm is going to be a lot easier to find, to source in Israel and Gaza than 5.7. So that's my choice. Put me on team MP5K.
So disappointing to him that we all chose the P90, but even more difficult for everybody out there is that we are at an even 3-for-3 split between P90 and MP5K, which is pretty much how it is in my heart. But
well, perhaps we can see the audience's tie-breaking capabilities.
yes. So as we go to the next portion, I wanted to talk about explosives in tunnels, which is, there's not a lot to talk about. You've got a very compressed, condensed location. Tunnels that are about a little bit more than your shoulder height as you're crossing through. Grenades may not be the best thing to employ in those places, especially when you don't have any cover in front of you.
Well, I'm something that immediately comes to mind for me is, again, the closest that I have been to a enclosed space explosion was a breaching charge in a I don't know, simulated breach, right? And it was an actual breaching charge, and I was down the wall, and I didn't have ear pro on, and I thought, like, yeah, it'll be fine, like, I'll be good, I'll be like a badass and not like plug my ear. And I got my bell rung by it, like, and that was just it. You felt it come down the wall, just whoom, and it was not amazing. I can only imagine something like that happening in a space where there's nowhere else for it to go.
Yeah, I mean, in this case, like, let's say there was a room and you wanted like breach concrete to go into the other side, you could shape charge it. Basically, like, you could even like back it with water, because they make the containers that water back it and then direct everything towards one way. But the internal compression absolutely is going to be a huge consideration when you're using any type of explosives with that. I mean, you could be like pretty far down and still feel it. And that would affect you and your team's mission readiness. So if it doesn't kill you, right? But anyways, is there anything else we wanted to add to this? I mean, to the audience, it's a 3-to-3.
Let's see what the audience said in the poll.
All right.
Throw it up.
And go to the next portion. I don't think we need the Russian man to introduce us to the next portion, right? All right, so let's look at what happened out there, you guys who are voting. And I clipped this about an hour before we went into the segment, and
disaster
by 1%. So out of the 6.4, so around like 6,400 votes or so, give or take, there was somewhere in the margins of 64 votes that went towards the MP5K that broke that tie that would have landed a 50-50 otherwise.
Well,
so,
I mean, half of you are wrong.
Yeah, so this is usually this for us when we run these pick one scenarios. This is actually a pretty good indication that the pick one was actually really difficult to choose between, because we're seeing a very split community or a very split thought process between everyone in the community, and even very split choices between the influencers that we talk to and us on the panel that are trying to decide this. So I was really excited seeing 50-50 turnout, but we also clipped quite a bit of comments that came out from the comment section that we could start talking about as well. So the first one, obviously the best solution. My solution that Ryu the Asian 47 said: call up your favorite cousin Harry. I'm sure he's got contacts within Hamas in order to make the mission easier or even get Sarah outright. Now, if you do, I mean, this is actually a thing. Hostage negotiation is a thing. If you have a fixer, work with a fixer to do that. Obviously, if you're going kinetic, you don't have a fixer. That is why you want to get to know Cousin Harry.
All right.
Next comment. Ocean King 6725 said, the big pro to the MP5 in my mind is with the 147s that would be subsonic. With suppressed, it would be much more enjoyable firing into the confines of the tunnel system. But I'd be more inclined to go with a P90 because it's more capable against soft armor and ranged engagements. This sort of kind of goes into what I was talking about earlier, to be honest. I mean, I put this in there. I didn't think I forgot that this comment was put in here. But do you guys have anything to add to this? I mean, I agree with him.
I think we talked this one through like pretty extensively already.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. Maybe there's something to be said here about looking at some point in the future. Maybe Oxide can give us a little ballistic gel testing differentials between the 147s and some of the P90 ammo. I know he did some armor pen for you during the NATO trials video.
Yeah, well, we could talk to him about that for sure. Ben is busy flying helicopters nowadays, though, so it may take a while. Let's see. So JB76489 said that MP5K M suppresses better. 9 hollow points, so 9mm hollow points, are better against unarmored targets. You're more likely to find 9mm if you have to scavenge. This, up until the whole point about scavenge, okay, fine. But like, I don't think that's a realistic scenario that you're going to find like a box of Fiocchi subsonics down there, just kind of like you're in the world of Fallout. And then you pick it up and you know it's in your inventory and you load up your mags. I don't think that's a realistic expectation. So I wanted to put this in there to. I don't know if we talked about Battlefield pickups to death yet, but in my mind, Battlefield pickups could be a thing if you're there for like weeks. But if you're looking at like a 2-day operation or a 36-hour operation, I think that's highly unlikely.
Mm-hmm.
My big thing, sorry to interrupt. My big thing with the Battlefield pickup is, again, you're trying to get in and out as quickly as possible. The only way that I would consider picking up anything that I found in a tunnel, again, historical precedents for being mined, trapped, wired, you would have to take very, very careful and deliberate time to look at every single item, how it's placed, and make sure it is not trapped, and be very, very careful in touching anything in the tunnel and in my or just in the area. So in my mind, like that kind of negates Battlefield pickups for this scenario, because you're just going to want to be in and out, and you don't have the time to necessarily kind of deliberately assess everything that you find.
Yeah, it's actually really interesting. There's a lot of images coming out of Ukraine on the way they booby trap things, putting small amounts of explosives in lighters to blow people's fingers off, AK magazines that have rounds on the top to where when you shoot some of them, it just explodes when the follower goes up. Really, really clever on the way some of these booby traps are placed, and it goes beyond just, oh, is it wired? Is it placed on a pressure? It goes well beyond that. But that being said, typically these things manifest themselves like a couple months down the road after a war has been broken out, rather than like the first few days of a war. But that said, it's still not a risk that I would take myself, and it's unrealistic.
So would we go as far as saying this idea of like the Battlefield pickup or scavenging stuff is actually just like a complete fallacy? I mean, I think back to, I was listening to, I think it was Sean Ryan's interview with Tony Cowden Tony is, I think he's Green Beret guy. He's pretty impressive shooter now as well. And he was talking about an operation that went poorly for him. While I think he was either contracting for the CIA at the time, or he was on a very limited personnel mission when they were engaged, and he ended up being down to like sub mag of rifle and sub mag of handgun running through a city where he was trying to manage his ammunition between rifle and pistol. Depending on where he could use a pistol, he would use a pistol. And at no point, at least in that scenario, did he go, oh yeah, and then I decided to like pick up one of the rifles that I could have picked up. It was like, no, he'd rather have the pistol that he knew that he had with him that was working. Like, so I wonder how much of that is just as you said, you're maybe on the ground for like weeks and you have to assimilate more into the culture or the area in which you're operating.
I think it really depends. I mean, I hate to put it like that's such a weak response sometimes, but it depends. But in a highly kinetic operation like this, like you're not there for months for this particular scenario, right? I get like Tony Cowden he was like actually trying to get out of Dodge in that particular scenario. He was actually fighting to stay alive, to survive, and he wouldn't pick up he was picked up by the helicopter, was like 7 rounds in his pistol and like 5 rounds in his
you
rifle,
listened to it too. Yeah, I think that's what it was. Yeah, something crazy.
Yeah, like he was riding the Razor all the way till he was picked up. But yeah, I mean, that to me just gives me it. I wouldn't say that it's entirely unrealistic. I have learned to say that there's always a what if in scenarios. But if you have pre-mission planning as you're stepping off, if you have one option with a firearm that takes lighter and more voluminous ammunition and one that takes less, but can potentially pick up more local stuff, you have much lower risk of using ammunition that you packed than having to deal with an unreliable resupply system. And I would always err on the side with a lower risk when it comes to stuff like that. Just me. Not always, but in this scenario, sorry, can't speak in absolutes, right?
All right, what's next then, Henry?
Let's see. So these were from the Discord, our Patreon Discord channel, and Rook was talking about a one-handed operation with the P90 can still be effective, allowing you to actively control your VIP, and with deeper mags allowing you to stay in the fight longer before reloading. And then Zwerchow would have to agree with a P90. It would be really nice to run single-handed when you have to use the other hand to interact and guide the VIP. G-Man, the only thing I'd note is shots at unknown distances will be easier with a P90 out of the tunnel. Yes, I mean that's we kind of talked through some
we
of
hit
that.
on all of these, right?
The one thing I will add, when we're talking about going up on the street, now people out there don't know that we've already filmed the P90 for a practical accuracy episode, but we've actually pushed the P90 on our practical accuracy course. It will reach a longer distance than most people will think. However, when it did reach at any distance, those plates were not moving. Like, that was one of the most difficult firearms to spot any type of movement. Like, we had to rely on hearing whether it was a hit or not for every single one of those. So it's always a give and a take. It's always a plus and a minus, right? So can you reach at longer distances? Yes. And I realize it sounds like I'm contradicting myself, but I'm looking at the tunnels, which are about 70 to, I would say, maybe 150 meters of a straight line if it exists. Within that distance, I'm very comfortable with the P90. That was my thought. I just wanted to add to the distance thing that people were talking about. And then these were also from our patron Discord. Stone Gwendol, while the P90 offers subsonic ammunition options, 62 subs have little energy compared to 158 grain subs. We sort of talked about that already with two of our patrons, giving him that. Widespread adoption of questionable armor, helmets, Kevlar vests that Hamas has seen being used, and if due to the Asian origins of the armor of AP has any merit. So basically, does 5.7 AP have any merit on penetrating armor? And not sure the extra magazine depth of the P90 offsets the terminal effectiveness of 5.7.
I think that's what Ian said, right?
Yeah. So I am hedging on it to offset that because 5.7 does tumble when it goes into a meat target, and 5.7 AP certainly deals with armor better than 9mm. But those are my reasoning. Those are my reasons for it. Did you guys have any thoughts on that?
No, I think we talked through all of these. Yeah.
All right, this is a good one. And he did not know that Brass was going to come on the show, but how about a B&T MP9? For those out there, the MP9 is a TP9, but the machine pistol version, the machine pistol 9, like Brass Facts carrying. Machine pistol is more concealable in my opinion, and even as described, body armor isn't that commonly seen in Warzone. I mean, I think it's a valid option, the MP9, or in this case, if we're talking about local region, like a micro Uzi or something like that, is also a valid consideration. Although the Uzi is an open bolt, like an older design, still very respectable, but the micro Uzi is much harder to control than like an MP5 or an MP9, I would say. I mean, if we're venturing out there, there's a lot of different other choices. I'd say the MP9 is a good choice. The MP7 is also a good consideration if you wanted to drop into the H&K PDW side. But in this particular case, I think we constructed this to force people to think about the merits of a PDW versus a 9mm PDW versus a Type 1 PDW, a PDW using a specialty cartridge, and how those merits would play out in this one particular scenario. But any other options that you guys would have taken down there outside of the P90 and the MP5K PDW?
Ashley, you first.
I mean, again, the funny thing is my gut instinct would have been to take an MP5K. Again, I would choose it for almost all those scenarios. But then you prompt me with, okay, choose between the MP5K and the P90, which forced me to consider the P90 and start to think about it. And that mag capacity would be nice. Again, for all the reasons we already talked. That's why I did end up saying P90 for this scenario. But yeah, if I was left unbidden to say what I would take, I would have come up with the MP5K.
Oh, interesting. I think for me, I think I mentioned it earlier, like 300 Black comes to mind in like the Rattler package or something extremely small. The problem with the 300 Blacks is most of the time we set them up in such a way where they get larger than PDW size, like very quickly. So we'd have to be extremely specific that you're taking something that's absolutely shrunk down into that actual package, which, mind you, at that point you're shooting, what's the Rattler? It's a 5-inch barrel or whatever. You are losing. You're losing quite a bit of the booty that comes with that particular round. I mean, not a ton. It's not like 5.56 out of that short of a barrel, but we're obviously, if we're shooting subs from something like that, where it's not like we're getting major terminal ballistic effect. So it's still it's not as if it's night and day, but I do think that I would end up with something like that personally.
since you brought up 300 blackout, I mean that's actually been a comment, a steady string of comments in the comment section about 300 blackouts. One interesting consideration, I thought. Have you ever seen the Desertex MDR?
Mm-hmm.
It's their bullpup rifle 5.56 configuration, but they have a version. I forget what they call MDR-X, I think. They always compare it to a P90 because it's the P90's length, but it shoots 300 blackout, and so you're able to have more of a barrel on a system that's the size of a P90 that shoots 300 blackout.
Interesting.
In that aspect. So then with the MDR-X, you would, assuming that the pack is going to be the same, dimensions to push in, your weight is going to be heavier for sure. Like 300 blackout is heavier
what's
than both.
230 grains or something like
Yeah.
that, right? Or
Yeah.
220
I think-
instead of one,
I think that
147 versus
that would be the biggest difficulties when it came to people, with the 300 blacks, is the fact that your carry weight is going to be significantly higher than either one of those, especially if you pack subs. If you pack supers, then you're going to have to deal with the negative effects of shooting a little 300 blackout in a tunnel repeatedly, which is like shooting an AK in a tunnel, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought this was an interesting topic to kind of like start thinking about what other systems out there would be valuable. Let's see. John Blackstone 357. MP5. Your contacts only have handguns and are much more likely to be in 9mm. In case you need to give them ammo to keep them in the fight. And I would think you'd be able to carry more ammo in the first place. I also believe the MP5 to be more reliable. Thoughts? Oh, my voice broke for a second there too. Sorry. Thoughts?
I mean, I don't have enough use experience with the P90, though I do with the MP5, to say that I would tend to agree that the MP5 is, well, I would say I know the MP5 is reliable in all conditions. For the P90 with me, just with my experience with the P90, still kind of a question mark. I think it theoretically should do it, but don't have the time on it to have an, real comment on that. So I'd say I'd give the MP5 the edge in reliability for sure.
I think when you're talking about packing ammo for the team, I think it would be just as easy to throw a couple, 2 or 3 boxes of 50 round 9mm into my bag if I really wanted to think about doing something like that. Since you're packing out with your systems anyways.
Right. So if you felt like you needed to provide ammo or additional ammo for the team that you were meeting, you would just pack that ammo as a matter of fact in boxes, as opposed to trying to bring it in as part of a complete system of your gun.
Yeah, instead of having to strip rounds, and I would just pack a couple boxes for them.
Mm-hmm.
Or just bring loaded mags. If they're carrying,
right. Fair enough. Right. Yeah. If they're running Glocks or they're running whatever, you just bring them loaded mags. Yeah. Fair enough.
Dropping back to the last topic, actually, Ian's still here. He was talking about if compactness is a major issue, what about a stock pistol like a BNT USW or a Flux Raider?
I was thinking USW actually. That was one of the things that crossed my mind. Big thing is I just like a little. If I'm going USW, I would almost either pick a pistol or a subgun, but the USW definitely crossed my mind.
I would say honestly to this note, if I were outfitting some of the security team downrange, I think this would actually be a better option than just dropping them with a Glock, and unless you need to go like low vis, and if you knew that there was a little bit more of an opportunity for them to get into contact, but at the same time you also didn't want to laden them with something absolutely massive. You wanted them to keep a footprint of a pistol. I mean, a USW is perfect. Like USW or a Flux Raider with a little RMR on top, far more capability than just a pistol.
Agreed 100% there.
All right, let's see. Easily, the MP5 for reliability. I don't trust the P90 mags when exposed to dust. Moon dust ruins P90 mags. Maybe Delrin rollers help, but in my experience, feed ramps being dusty is enough. It likely is a non-factor, but it's fun to bring up. In the tunnel, the 9mm is far less likely to ricochet
More.
are far more likely to ricochet than 5.7. 5.7 tends to splash straight into small shrapnel, while 9mm continues as larger chunks in lead, especially with ball ammo.
I mean, Ashley, how much is, within the confines again of going back to your area of expertise with subterranean stuff? How much is ricochet, fragmentation, rounds skipping, and continuing down? How much is that is factored into the considerations?
I mean, huge. A lot of it depends on the structure of the tunnel. Again, are you looking at concrete walls? Some people use, steel tubing for walls and then reinforce. But the bottom line is, you're going to, if you're underground, you're going to be dealing with walls in very close proximity to you. So ricochets are always a consideration.
I think the Navy in the 90s, they were running a lot of MP5s, and one of the considerations in using Mark 18s was the fragmentation of 5.56 versus the 9mm bouncing in bulkheads. That's one of the considerations. Like, please don't say like that's the only reason that they did that, right? But the reliability of the P90 magazines, yeah, I mean, that's a valid point because the P90 uses the rotary magazines. Now, I mean, I have not experienced anything like that. I've also not subjected my P90 mags to moon dust. So I cannot speak to that as a point of experience. But if I would also say that of the two firearms, the P90 actually has a dust cover to the ejection port. But the MP5 is I would trust the MP5's reliability regardless, though. Now, I wanted to bring this up. I think they'd both be fine. I think that really is in my, like, when it boils down to the core of it, that's really the vein of it. That I think they're both fine. But this,
let's just hit on this really quick, just for a second. A lot of the scenario briefs around Pick 1 have rationalizable answers that can lead you to either option. But the whole point of the exercise is to think through that and go through the thought process. Obviously, we're looking within a very specific contextualized fictional scenario. But a lot of these things and the way that your decision making works in something like this could theoretically be extrapolated and utilized in a more, let's call it, realistic scenario for your day-to-day life.
There you go. Let's see. The second part of this, this is like pretty small, but let me read it. Both seem like they'd be great for the subterranean part of the mission. What sticks out the most is when Henry mentioned the possibility of having to fight out in the open streets before or after the tunnel section. In my opinion, that feels like it'd be the more concerning deciding factor since the weakness of the PDWs will be more prominent in an open gunfight in the streets. Agreed. Not so much the case of the P90, but definitely the case of the 9mm chambered in MP5. P90 works best anti-terrorist, down air crewmen, police sort of weapon. P90 has a greater range and better armor protection, terminal ballistics at mid-range. We talked about a good portion of this. I don't like thinking of the P90 as a rifle substitute. Like, can it reach out at those distances? Yes. Do I want to be standing at 300 meters downrange from a P90? Absolutely not. But compared to a rifle, it is not even close to the performance bracket. Like, looking at its performance, it almost feels like, just looking at the plates, and this is not scientific, they look like when we're shooting 10.5 10.5 5.56s out to, and this is with 55 grains. If we were to shoot a 55 grain out of a 10.5 inch AR-15 at a 500 or 600 yard target, the P90 looks like that at 150 and 2.
Right. Yeah.
So the amount of energy that you're bleeding off is significant past that, despite the fact that you could still hit. It's just like when people are showing that you can hit an 800 meter target with a 14.5 M4. You can, but terminal ballistics are also a thing. And terminal ballistics derives from velocity with the P90. So that's a consideration. I mean, I don't want to be unrealistic here. I chose a P90, but I don't want to be unrealistic with saying it's the best thing ever. It's got its downsides. That being said, an MP5's a 5-inch barreled MP5 shooting out to 200 meters is not like really good, like by any stretch. Which, Josh, does that mean that we also have to consider doing a practical accuracy episode on a sniper MP5?
Well, I know that you have one with your claw mount.
Ooh, we'll see. We'll see if we get to that. All right. And finally, I just wanted to show you a real life scenario of what happens during the day when we are editing some of these things through. Ian McCollum, MP5K, will not elaborate. So this is what transpired. We started talking over the phone, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I'll record you something real quick," and there you have it. Ian got to participate. Thank you.
Cool.
Ian.
Well, listen, Henry, we're about 2 hours into the live at this point. Let's go to the comment section here and see what people have to say. And right off the bat, some of the initial commentary that we have flowing in, I suppose, or we've had throughout the course of this, referenced whether or not, and I don't know that you're going to find this because it's buried rather deep, but reference whether or not one-handed operations was actually relevant in this type of a scenario. I don't know. As I think through that a bit, I go with, it's actually very relevant. Being able to operate one-handed with a weight balance of these types of things, especially in enclosed spaces, seems to me to be exceptionally relevant. I mean, what are your guys' take on that? I mean, I know we talked about it initially. Is that something we double down on and say, yeah, no, I would say that that's actually still I would consider it to be very relevant.
I mean, it is when you've got multiple things that's going on, right? I mean, that's one of the design principles of the PDW project back in the 1990s, because your medics, your auto mechanics, your tank crew, they may be doing some other stuff and have this thing slung on them. So that was a consideration, in my opinion, because you're substituting a pistol, a handgun. That said,
oh no,
shall we bring in the offensive pistol project?
Oh my goodness.
One of the three of us actually has a Mark 23. Did you know that?
I wonder who it is.
Ashley, why don't you tell us a little bit about the Mark 20? I only have the much more practical USP 45 tactical.
Wait, what? Psych? Ashley has the Mark 23? Oh, I've been duped.
Yeah.
Which, yours is actually more practical. Again, James Williamson and was it 1911 Syndicate just did a fantastic video on the Mark 23. So for all the gory, nerdy details, it was a phenomenal video. But the biggest thing is it's purpose built to a list of government, specifically U.S. SOCOM driven requirements. It's huge. It's true serve handgun. It does exactly what it's supposed to, and I would argue it does it well. But just based on the design at the time, the requirements, it's massive. It's huge, and has a 12-round capacity for its size and kind of today's environment. But I still love it.
I mean, what if, and this is heresy out there, but what if they rechamber the Mark 23 into a 9mm and put a
I mean-
red dot sight on top?
It's the same size as an MP5K, like literally.
All right,
So,
that's a fair point there. Fair point, very, very fair point. And just again, this. Look at this.
Ooh.
First of all, Russians wouldn't use a VZ61. However, actually, no, they actually did export a bunch of sanitized ones to other agencies back in the Cold War, like the Diensteinheit 9, the GSG 9 we have at home in East Germany. They evidently also use the VZ61 with the PM63, the Polish, the rack. So not that is a. Oh, actually, there's been quite a few comments about the Mark 23. But yeah, the VZ61 on that other hand is like an OG PDW, but it is so out of like that's the worst of both worlds, to be honest. Like that's not even 9mm. Like you have worse ballistic performance, you have worse range, very packable, and I guess you could akimbo that like Neo going into the building in the Matrix, but that is not a serious consideration in my thought.
Also, the magazines and the rate of fire. I mean, it's just got an insane rate of fire, and you're working with 20-round magazines unless you find some garage modded extended ones.
You shot the one where you shot Jim Fuller's, right?
It was actually the one that I shot belonged to the Hugheses, but yeah, so
they took the rate limiter off of that thing, so the actual rate of fire is actually really manageable. Like you could actually fire it like a manageable subgun.
Okay.
But a lot of people in the States, when they build it, they take the rate limiter out of it, so it just zips through the entire magazine like crazy. Yeah. Like it zips through it like a Mac 10.
Yeah, it's like 1,200 rounds a minute. So I'll say the ones that I shot then.
I have one back here. I cannot show, unfortunately, but it's a shame. Let's see. Do you guys see any other ones?
How about a question about what do you think about a folding stock, short-barreled AK with the ability to clap on a suppressor?
I don't see that.
Could still be small enough to get it into a backpack.
So I guess this comes down to our thought on. It's almost akin or next, like the same thought process as the Rattler almost. Because the Krink is about the same size as a full-size MP5. And the Rattler, I believe, is somewhere between the MP5K and the full-size MP5, right? Or closer to the MP5K.
It's closer to the K, yeah.
Yeah.
It's like a sub-size. It's like the MCX sub-sized, but in 300 black, if I recall correctly. Not MCX, MPX.
I mean, I wouldn't say that the AK is unusable, but like... I don't know if I remember some other influencers saying that the Krink was a really good like vehicle firearm. Have you ever shot? Josh, you've shot my micro Galil, my little 8-inch barrel Galil in 7.62.
I definitely would if we're talking about the answer to this question about a short barrel AK. If you're not suppressing it. Huge pain, massive maximum pain. Your Galil, the first shot I took out of it, and this was like in an outdoor environment, not even undercover, just like in an open bay, and it riled my teeth. Like my teeth were like buzzing from the concussion, just because it was like it's an 8-inch barreled Galil with full Haas 7.6239 going off, and that was absolutely vicious.
The muzzle flash, it has a flash hider, Josh. Even with a can on it, and even with a can on it, I still get flash out the end.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's something that your full size. That's something that your full house cartridges, whenever you shrink it down by cutting the barrel, unless you turn it into a bullpup form,
Yeah, you have so much unburnt powder in those systems that it's just
Well, yeah. So I mean, imagine like you take contact in the tunnels, right? Yes, you have greater distance and more oomph on target, but it looks like the scene from the Matrix when you're firing that thing. It's just like flashing the entire time. Dust is like all over the place. You're pretty much kind of browning yourself out in that little tunnel. Like that's a rough spot to be in when you're doling contact like that. But
Mhm.
maybe I just need to use my wimpy little PDWs. I chose a P90.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I see some comments asking then about how that compares to 300 black and why that may or may not be different. The ability to run suppressed through the same system with a subsonic load in 300 black, because your Galil, we also shot subs, and shooting subs from that thing was ridiculous. That was like cheating, right? Like, I know you have that footage somewhere. Someday we will show people. I hammered the crap out of the target with that gun. Like, that was awesome.
Also very, very quiet.
Mm-hmm.
But once you drop full house cartridges in there, it is absolutely insane, those things. But I guess that comes to the point where you ask yourself, like, if you take a little small tiny little sub gun or subcompact size full house rifle, like a small Galil, into the tunnel, and you have to load it with subs or nerf the velocity, at which point are you just asking yourself, like, why am I doing this? Why am I not just taking the MP5K if you want like 100 plus grains to drop on the target?
Mm-hmm.
I would say the one advantage would be, and this would, I'm not even going to say it because it's not necessarily practical.
Say it, tell it.
Saying that you could, switch between ammunition, but trying to manage subsonic magazines and supersonic magazines, like, just not gonna happen. You're gonna go fishing for a mag. You're gonna take whatever you got. You're gonna ram it into the weapon and drive on. Like, deliberately transitioning from 1 to 2 would have to be during like a complete reset, which, again, speed, you're not gonna do that. So
yeah, I wouldn't. I mean, like, it's certainly a feature of the cartridge for 300 blackout specifically. If you're switching between subs and supers, right? It's certainly a feature of the cartridge, and it's actually quite amazing that it actually works. No switching of gas systems, and you can run either or. That's amazing. However, you are not as comfortable to shoot the full house stuff. You flash a lot with the full house stuff, and then if you relegate it to subs, it's very comfortable to shoot, but then it's kind of like, if that's the main feature, I use that. There's the MP5 suppressed as well. So
Right.
let's see. Ashley, Tufu is here. This sounds like an inside. That sounds like an inside joke. What happens with 10.5 and 5.56? Tell us.
Well,
Is he
as
calling
we
you out on something?
ballistics, after you get longer than 10.5, that's where the magic starts to happen.
Yes.
That was from the very, very old days. Yeah, that joke goes way, way back. Ask Brandon about that joke sometime.
All right. Let's see. Let me see. Tell me if you see anything. We could fit probably like 1 or 2 more.
What about the Vector? There's one.
Let me see.
From Kyle. Kyler.
Here we go. Matt, 45. ACP Chris Vector. I really like the Vector, especially the automatic one, when we figured out that it had like a lot of what did it have? It had a lot of like horizontal.
A lot of
distortion.
horizontal movement, but it was like there was very little vertical movement, a
Mhm.
lot less than with the MP5, but
Yeah.
it was like a hose trying to control the hose, right, from
Yeah.
side to side.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, it certainly is a consideration, especially if you're dropping 45. And Chris, they have these massive mag capacity magazines that you could slap in there. So you start with a standard Glock mag, which that would be actually a feature if you used a 9mm vector and you use Glock mags and your whole team was using Glock. Now that is actually something you could think about, because it'd be hilarious if you've got your contractors all with these like ghetto looking stendos sticking out of their Glock 19s as they break in, like bust the cap. But the vector, it's one of those things. It's actually a lot larger than you'd think when you try to use it. So
I think you brought this up in the PDW vid, Henry. It's like the Vector is a submachine gun.
Mhm.
Whereas, our original classification of it in the classic video we did was calling it sort of a vehicle PDW, but in and of itself, that was sort of a call to it being a bit larger than a traditional sort of PDW setup, and sort of designed again more as almost like an offensive sub gun, right?
Yeah. And there's a specific reason why we said maybe it's a good vehicle PDW. One, because it like bullet hoses stuff. So if you break out with a vector and you need to drop ammo from your vehicle, you're just hosing through a windshield. The other thing is it's heavy. It's really heavy for a firearm. You wouldn't think so because it's very plasticky on the outside, but it's pretty heavy for what it is. I guess a full-size MP5 is also, decently heavy, but then I guess it gets to the point where like, why not carry a full-size MP5, right?
Mhm.
Because we're deliberately trying to conceal, and the Vector is the size of a full-size MP5, if not a little more. And so that's where it comes down to. It's a bullet hose. It's harder to conceal. It's easy to pack in a vehicle because it's heavy. But then if you whip that thing out, you're dropping like 40 rounds of 9mm in like fractions of a second into someone's windscreen. So let's see. Do you see anything else?
No, I think this is probably a good place to wrap. I mean, this was a very close scenario, Henry. We came down to a 3-3 split between us and the 3 video submission guests, and then the audience split 49-51. Again, a very close scenario. I mean, Ashley, it was great getting a chance to talk with you, and I appreciate all the expertise that you brought regarding the subterranean elements to this thing. Stuff that, again, some of it seems sort of, I don't know, like you would think of it just going through normal, like, yeah, the gun goes off in an enclosed space. That sucks a lot. But then there's other considerations that, I mean, we're so far out of the realm of what I was thinking of that it was very interesting to have you talk about them. And the casualty statistics or planning statistics that you talk about are absolutely horrific. That sounds absolutely awful.
Yeah. Thank you both very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so currently we don't have anything put together for the next pick one, but I think we're definitely diving back into this. I think one of the big things we wanted to bring other people in the community who have spent a lot of time working on topics and subjects like this, who could bring more dialogue into some of these topics, and really crafting the scenario to push ourselves to think about certain small things, small differences that could make a big difference on mission.
That's right.
But
so guys, in the comments, once this video is done and publishes, post in the comments section where or what scenario you'd like to see us do next. Throw out some ideas, and we'll definitely take a look at them. Actually, one more quick final question. Are there any publications that I know you've referenced a few of your publications, are any of those publicly available, or are those all behind the clearance paywall?
No, so the one publication I have that's publicly available is I did an article on subterranean operations that was featured in Volume 2 of Light Fighters Manifesto. I think it's still, I believe, a for purchase publication.
But it's not clearance. It's not gated by clearance level.
That's done at the unclassified level.
Got it.
And-
Fantastic. And then also, guys, obviously, Ashley and Henry did a full podcast breakdown on this subject over on the 9HP channel as well. Right, guys? This was like as of earlier this year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it was January, February that we
So if
talked
you're
about.
interested in hearing more, maybe we can drop a link, Henry, after this video is published to that article that Ashley referenced, and then and also to the podcast that you guys did as well.
Yeah, if I would say outside of just the scenarios, also if you guys had any suggestions on the X versus X that you guys could think of, or even more so, if there are any influencers or thought leaders within the community that you think would be a good fit for us to talk to, a good source for us to learn from, feel free to drop that in the comment section below. Let us know, and that's honestly the best way of nudging us towards the right direction.
And go hit them up and comment on their content to let them know that they should come and participate in one of the pick ones as well.
Yep.
All right, guys, thanks again so much. Until next time, we'll see you all on the range.
116 Light 2, 1 Victor, 2 packs, Recon 1, over.
716 is Steel Knight 6, 4 Vic, 8 packs, Redcon 1, green to green, top copy, over.
Steel Knight 6, this is 716, roger, over. 16, Steel Knight 1, 1 pack, green, over. This is 716, roger, over.
16 Light 2, 1 Victor, 2 packs, Recon 1, over.